What should have been a conversation about the themes of the film, about working mothers in America, and about the challenges women face in Hollywood quickly became something else entirely. Joy leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. "Oh, spare me, Julia. You want to talk about challenges? Try sitting in this chair every day and dealing with people who think they're above scrutiny because they're famous." Julia stared at her in disbelief. Above scrutiny? Nobody is above scrutiny. But there's a difference between scrutiny and a personal attack. There's a difference between journalism and gossip. Joy rolled her eyes. That's easy for you to say when you're the one being questioned. No, Julia replied firmly. It's easy for me to say because it's true. You invited me here to discuss a film. Instead, you've spent this entire interview dragging up decades-old tabloid headlines and trying to turn them into some kind of moral indictment. The audience sat frozen. Even the other hosts seemed unwilling to interrupt. Joy folded her arms. Maybe the problem is that you're uncomfortable being held accountable. Julia laughed sharply. Accountable for what? Living my life? Making mistakes? Being human? Last time I checked, those weren't crimes. You've spent years cultivating an image, Joy shot back. People deserve to know who you really are. And who exactly are you to decide that? Julia asked. The question hung in the air. For a moment, Joy seemed caught off guard. Then her expression hardened. I'm someone who isn't afraid to tell the truth. The truth? Julia repeated. No, the truth is that you've already decided who I am. You've already written the story in your head. None of my answers matter because you're not interested in a conversation. You're interested in proving yourself right. The tension in the studio was overwhelming. Every camera remained fixed on the two women. Joy leaned forward. Maybe you're just upset because someone finally challenged you. Julia slowly stood from her chair. The movement immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. I'm upset, she said carefully, because I came here in good faith. I came here to discuss a project that means a great deal to me. I came here expecting a professional conversation. Instead, I've spent the last several minutes being insulted by someone who seems more interested in creating controversy than understanding anything I'm actually saying. Joy stood as well. So now you're the victim? No, Julia replied. I'm someone setting a boundary. The audience remained completely silent. You know what's disappointing? Julia continued. It's not that you disagree with me. It's not even that you've been critical. It's that you've reduced this entire conversation to cheap personal attacks when there were so many meaningful things we could have discussed. Joy scoffed. Meaningful according to who? According to anyone who values substance over spectacle. A few audible gasps came from the audience. Joy's face tightened. You're awfully self-righteous for someone who's spent her entire career being adored, and you're awfully cynical for someone whose job is supposedly to facilitate conversations, Julia replied. The other hosts exchanged nervous glances. The atmosphere had become impossible to ignore. Julia looked around the studio before turning back to Joy. You know what? This isn't productive anymore. Joy raised an eyebrow. So you're leaving? Julia picked up her notes from the table. I'm choosing not to participate in this. That's convenient. No, Julia said calmly. What's convenient is pretending that cruelty is honesty. What's convenient is calling personal attacks tough questions, so you never have to take responsibility for them. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Julia continued. I've spent more than 30 years in this industry. I've handled criticism. I've handled failure. I've handled success. What I won't do is sit here and pretend that disrespect is professionalism. The room was silent. Julia gathered her things. She turned briefly toward the other hosts. It was lovely seeing all of you. Then she faced Joy one final time. I genuinely hope one day you remember that meaningful conversations don't require tearing people down. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit. No one tried to stop her. The cameras followed as she crossed the studio floor, her posture composed despite everything that had happened. The studio remained quiet long after she was gone. Joy sat back in her chair, staring toward the exit as the reality of the moment settled over the room. For several seconds, nobody spoke. You're not holding anyone accountable, Joy, Julia said, her voice trembling with controlled anger. You're exploiting personal details for entertainment. There's a difference. The studio was completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Every person in the room seemed frozen as the confrontation continued to escalate. Joy crossed her arms. That's rich coming from someone who's spent decades benefiting from publicity. Publicity isn't the same thing as public humiliation, Julia shot back. And you know it. The tension between them was palpable. The audience watched in stunned silence as the two women stared each other down across the desk. Joy shook her head. No, Julia, what I know is that celebrities love attention until someone asks a question they don't like. Julia laughed sharply. You keep calling these questions. They're not questions. They're accusations wrapped in insults. Joy's jaw tightened. Maybe that's because the truth makes people uncomfortable. The truth? Julia replied. You haven't shown any interest in truth since I walked onto this set. Several members of the audience exchanged nervous glances. Even the crew members seemed unsure how to react. Julia took a slow breath. I came here to discuss a film. A project that means something to me. A story about perseverance, family, and resilience. But instead of discussing any of that, you've spent this entire interview trying to reduce my life to tabloid headlines. Joy leaned forward. And maybe that's because those headlines matter. They matter to you because conflict is all you're interested in. The remark landed hard. Joy's face reddened instantly. You know what your problem is? She snapped. You think being famous puts you above criticism. No, Julia replied. I think being human means I deserve basic respect. The audience broke into scattered applause before quickly falling silent again. Joy looked visibly irritated. Respect is earned. And so is professionalism, Julia answered. The room seemed to grow even quieter. The other hosts remained motionless, clearly aware that any attempt to intervene would only make things worse. Joy pointed toward Julia. You've spent this entire interview acting like a victim. No, Julia said calmly. I've spent this entire interview defending myself from someone determined to turn a conversation into an attack. Joy scoffed. That's your interpretation. It's the only interpretation. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The tension hung heavily over the studio. Then Julia continued, You know what's disappointing? It's not that you disagree with me. It's not that you've challenged me. It's that you never gave this conversation a chance to be about anything meaningful. Joy shook her head dismissively. Meaningful according to you. Meaningful according to the audience that came here expecting a conversation, not a spectacle. A murmur moved through the crowd. Joy's expression hardened. You really think you're winning people over with this? This isn't about winning. Julia's voice was steady now. It's about standing up for yourself when someone decides to use their platform to tear you down. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Julia continued. There's a difference between asking difficult questions and trying to embarrass someone. There's a difference between accountability and hostility. And there's definitely a difference between journalism and personal attacks. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Joy seemed momentarily unsure how to respond. Julia looked around the studio. Then she turned back toward Joy. I've spent my entire career accepting criticism when it's fair and constructive. But I won't sit here and pretend that what happened today falls into either category. Joy laughed bitterly. So now you're leaving? Julia gathered her notes from the table. No, I'm choosing not to participate in this anymore. The simple statement carried more weight than any shouted insult. Several audience members shifted in their seats. The atmosphere had completely changed. Julia looked toward the other hosts. I'm sorry this became what it became. Then she faced Joy one final time. I hope someday you realize that meaningful conversations don't require tearing people apart. Without another word, she stepped away from the table. The cameras followed her as she walked across the studio floor. No one tried to stop her. Behind her, the set remained frozen in stunned silence. Joy sat motionless, staring toward the exit as Julia disappeared backstage. For several long seconds, nobody said a word. You're just being vindictive because you can. Vindictive? Joy stepped closer, her face twisted with contempt. I'm being honest. Something you clearly wouldn't recognize if it hit. You and your perfectly surgically enhanced face. A collective gasp swept through the studio. Even by the standards of a heated television argument, the remark crossed a line. Julia's expression shifted from shock to icy disbelief. Did you just attack my appearance on national television? Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet every person in the room heard it. For a brief moment, Joy seemed to realize she had gone too far, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. I'm just saying that maybe someone who's had as much work done as you have shouldn't be lecturing the rest of us about authenticity. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Julia stood motionless, staring at her. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, cold, and unmistakably controlled. You know what, Joy? I've dealt with difficult people throughout my entire career. I've worked with demanding directors, egotistical co-stars, and ruthless producers. But I have never encountered anyone as unprofessional, as cruel, or as insecure as you're being right now. Joy's face reddened instantly. How dare you call me insecure? You're the one who can't handle a few tough questions without falling apart. Tough questions? Julia repeated. You want tough questions? Here's one. When you go home tonight and look in the mirror, are you proud of what you see? Are you proud that you used your platform today to try to humiliate a guest? Are you proud that you've turned what should have been a conversation about empowering women into a personal attack? Joy was visibly shaking. Don't you dare try to turn this around on me. You came on this show knowing exactly what kind of questions we ask. I came on this show expecting professional journalism, not a personal vendetta disguised as an interview, Julia replied. And you know what the saddest part is? You had an opportunity to have a meaningful conversation about issues that actually matter. Instead, you chose to be petty, mean-spirited, and cruel. The word cruel seemed to hit a nerve. Joy pointed at Julia with a trembling hand. Get out. Get out of my studio right now. Julia stared at her. Your studio? This isn't your studio. Joy, this is supposed to be a place for meaningful discussion, not a platform for personal attacks. I said get out. Joy's voice cracked as she shouted. Security! I want her removed from the set immediately. For the first time, the other host stepped in. Joy, what are you doing? One of them asked. You can't just throw a guest off the show. Watch me, Joy snapped. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by some washed-up actress who thinks she's better than everyone else. Julia calmly picked up her purse. You're right about one thing, Joy. I am better than this. I'm better than participating in whatever this pathetic display is supposed to be. Security personnel had appeared at the edge of the set, looking uncertain and confused. Producers rushed back and forth, desperately trying to decide how to handle the situation. Joy was still shouting. That's right, run away, just like you always do when somebody calls you out. Julia stopped and turned one final time. I'm not running away. I'm choosing not to dignify this circus with my presence any longer. There's a difference. Don't you dare walk away from me, Joy shouted. Julia's smile was cold and restrained. Oh, I'm done with you. Completely done. She paused. And I think a lot of people are going to be done with this behavior too. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, her posture straight and composed despite the chaos behind her. Good riddance, Joy yelled after her. Don't bother coming back. This show doesn't need actresses who can't handle real questions. Julia stopped briefly near the edge of the set. Without turning around, she replied, Real questions require real journalism. Maybe someday you'll learn the difference. Then she continued walking. The studio remained frozen in stunned silence as she disappeared backstage. Behind her, the cameras kept rolling. Joy continued venting her frustration, while producers scrambled around the set, and the other hosts exchanged shocked glances. Eventually, the reality of what had happened began to settle over the room. For the first time all afternoon, nobody seemed to know what to say next.